For well over 3 years, I have been collecting the evidence needed to prove that the defendant has in fact committed fraud. The purpose of this presentation is to reiterate that evidence, show some of the newer evidence, give an understanding of this case, how it began, who I am, and the efforts I've made to prove this defendant has committed fraud.
Taken out of his bank account on September the 19th, which is in fact the day that we picked the truck up. Mr. Phillips has been very much involved in protecting his client. And this is just another example of how the defendant is doctoring their story as they go.
It's important that you first see how this all began.
Today is November the 1st, 2011. Time now 12:19, almost 20 after 12. I'm making this video because I need to demonstrate what has now happened to me a second time. My truck here, last night, Halloween night, don't know exactly the time. I went out to a grocery store, or rather a gas station, and such, probably less than a mile and a half. As I was coming back, and I'm going to point that out, as I was driving back at the corner of the street here that leads to the front of the house, just turning the corner, some kind of blowing sound in the motor, and the truck is now dead. First thing I'm going to do is kind of see if I can start it up so you can hear what it now sounds like. And I'll kind of point out some other stuff. I'm not going to discontinue the filming because I don't want there to be an argument there. If there's any editing, I'm going to keep this camera rolling with everything I do while I'm filming it. First thing, like I said, I'm going to try to start it up.
As soon as I made it back to Christiansburg, I filed my first complaint with the Better Business Bureau. Miss Sally Whiteside was the representative, and she communicated with the defendant. The defendant responded with his letter written on the 23rd of November 2011. That letter by itself is a critical piece of evidence based on the claims that the defendant made of what happened and when it happened. I responded to that letter, and I dissected all the claims that the defendant made. I kept communication with the Better Business Bureau and later found out that this case was closed because the defendant only had to respond to any claims that he chose. Then I filed my complaint with the Office of Consumer Affairs. The investigator advised me to no longer stay in an exchange with the defendant of claims. By that point, Mr. Phillips had gotten involved and prepared his 2-page letter. That letter made extreme claims of what happened or didn't happen, and also advised me that his client may sue me for defamation. With that, there was an attachment where the defendant provided 6 pages. That letter challenged my response letter. I moved on and went to the Office of Consumer Affairs and raised a complaint there. The defendant spoke with that investigator, but eventually the same issue came up. And so I was notified by Mr. Colston on January 19th that he was going to have to close my case because it could not be resolved. But Mr. Colston also sent me an email information about Mr. Richard Jones and how he could be an expert to look at my vehicle. Mr. Jones sent me his agreement and what he was going to require if he had to go to court on this case. He also advised me that I should speak with the defendant in a letter and request copies of the invoices and documents proving purchase of those parts. The defendant refused to give that up. That brought me to your office and Miss Anderson initially. I sent her my little bit of information, and when I met with her in your office, she prepared this handwritten note of the things that she was going to need me to provide to her so that we could understand the strength of this case. I converted that information into something that I could type up, and eventually I took that letter, the information I had typed up, and the invoices, and I gave them to Mr. Wayne Jones there in Virginia Beach. I'd prepared initially a letter where I had believed that both Joneses would be in this case. I later learned that Mr. Richard Jones had become ill and would not be able to assist me. Therefore, it left me with only Mr. Wayne Jones, and I made sure to pay for a notary to notarize the validity of his claims and his findings. What was first important was I needed to find the engine serial number.
You got flashlights at home?
Yes, sir.
Well, we're gonna have to get your flashlight at home.
Yeah.
But that is on the plate there. It's on the upper part of the plate. You won't see nothing with that thing because
No, I
it's
know.
so dark down in that hole. Yeah. I can't tell a thing.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'll get that.
And, you know, you try to clean it, and then you'll try to read it. You may have to put some oil on your fingers and rub it across there. I just don't know, but that's the block plate that has the number on it.
Well, thank you.
And it is there.
Wow.
Throughout this entire ordeal, I began to take both photographs and video footage of the engine while it was in the truck as well as once it was out. I wanted to make sure there was clear and unquestionable evidence that that engine had been removed and that it had been worked on and that a new engine was actually being installed. But I also took photographs before that engine was pulled out to show the difference of what it looked like where the transmission and engine were connected before it was removed, and also to show the clear and obvious tool marks that should have been left had the defendant actually removed those bolts when they claimed they worked on my engine. When you took over and filed your initial demand letter, the defendant, through Mr. Phillips, responded. After Mr. Phillips sent a VIN number, I took the time immediately and researched it and saw that it was to a 1988 Pontiac. To be sure that that wouldn't be a claim of a Pontiac engine that was installed in the truck, I also paid to get an expert online to verify whether or not that was even possible and what it would have cost. I kept a timeline of events and at your request, I knew I was going to need a statement from my doctor to support my claim of medical injuries. I kept track of the mileage that was on the vehicle. I prepared then multiple letters. The first primary was to Dr. Tingler, a 2-page letter and a packet of medical documentation both from the VA and as well as my neurologist there in Virginia Beach. That same letter and information went to Dr. Bain, to Dr. Zavodnik, to Miss Sandra Vaughn, and finally, the doctor that performed the C&P evaluation. This year in September, I brought another note personally to Dr. Tingler's office urging that he have contact and communication with you in reference to whether or not he would still be willing to testify in this case and what his testimony would be. I maintained control of the engine and a chain of custody showing that it left from Dahlia Automotive and was delivered and lifted off my truck to my storage unit.
I understand, yeah.
After my first video presentation, you sent the defendant another set of interrogatories about the claims in his November 23rd letter. He's claimed that all of those claims are in fact true, and then Mr. Phillips later sent a letter now claiming that it was unintentional that they had provided a VIN number well over a year ago. He claimed that it was an issue with the software system with D&M. The defendant still maintains that all the claims of the labors done on the 9th of August as well as the 16th of September, all those claims are still supposedly true. And the defendant wanted to point out that it was a dummy number that the system had generated by D&M, and that's why they had sent a VIN number. And according to the defendant, there was never a number anywhere he or his suppliers had ever found on that engine. One of my photographs, the defendant claimed the tag on the plate was something that they had torn off, and that was supposedly then proof that they had put that engine in. They've provided 2 payroll sheets, one for Mr. Collins and one for Mr. Snyder. Mr. Phillips explained the purpose of those payroll sheets as well as how it was calculated and the pay that was given, and how Mrs. McCord had emailed that information or emails that information each month. And on the payroll sheets for both mechanics, it shows the dates, but as you see, for Mr. Snyder, the date where he claimed on the 9th of August to have performed any labor, it doesn't show that. As well as for Mr. Collins, the claim of installing an engine, picking up an engine, all these claims, 15th or 16th, only the 19th of September shows my name and invoice.
This is wrong. This is just wrong. Morally, and I would pray it's considered legally wrong to take someone's money telling them that you're paying this because we have to put another engine in your truck. And regardless of how much money had been spent the first time, they claim I'll get a credit back from that, but still they asked for another $953 to not change my motor, to not tell me that they didn't change my motor, to not tell me that I couldn't trust it, gave me a 6-month warranty on my motor, a motor I already knew when I first took it in was bad. It had sat for over a year with water in it. I knew it needed to get changed out. I asked, can we do that? I was told no. Like I said, different route was supposed to save money. I am almost $3,000 now in the hole with getting this motor. And it's not all to the motor. But the fact is Automasters has gotten nearly $3,000 from me, plus the money I've had to spend to have a mechanic look at it to take care of the things that were hopefully going to clear up the stuttering thing that was going on, which it did, but it didn't change the fact that this motor is bad and it's not going to last. I mean, it's gone. It needs to be trashed. That's what I thought happened. I hope that this information will be useful and it's truthful. And hopefully somebody can do something about it, and that nobody else, like myself or otherwise, is both cheated and put in a situation where their health is now really at stake because they're stuck, because they trusted someone did what they claimed they were going to do and then later learned that it's all been a hoax. They're rich, and I hope morally they can sleep with themselves.
I have maintained an itemized list of the amount of money that had been spent as of June 23rd last year. I provided the medical evidence determined by the VA hospital that I had been deemed totally disabled. I provided the medical evidence where Dr. Tingler's findings that I was not only healthy in June of 2011, but then also his findings that I had relapsed. That decision was what started one of the greatest changes in my life. I was then later deemed also by Social Security as being totally disabled. The information and evidence that had been provided from the VA was also brought to the Social Security when they made their decision. And that decision was provided, and the information was also based off the conclusions of the VA. As of late, I've been able to get photographs of the engine that now sits in my vehicle, and you're able to see the difference between what that engine and transmission looked like when the defendant claimed they changed that motor, and the actual photographs to show what it looks like once it really was changed. What I felt is also important is for you to have a better understanding of who I am and all the efforts that I have gone through in trying to prove what the defendant has done. I have had no reason ever to lie about any aspect of my claims. Just as you are concerned about us going into a court getting a bad reputation as to who we are, there's no reason for me to do that to myself. I have honorably served in the military. I have been an educator both in the military as well as with special needs children, both in Germany and here in the United States. I've been involved in music since the day I was born. To experience music and entertainment in a manner that I would have never imagined possible for someone coming from a small town in the southwestern part of Virginia. My personal interest in music and entertainment carried me into another arena of my life, both while I served in the military and then after. I returned to Germany after getting out of the military and stayed an additional 10 years. I performed with various different bands. I have signed recording contracts with major record companies, Sony, Warner Chappell, publishing contract. When I returned to the United States, I continued working in education, special needs children, elementary grade. I also opened a landscape company in Virginia Beach. As you can tell, I have an interest in filming. And for the longest, I also dabbed in film and music. I'm not someone who wishes to destroy my name or my life by making up some kind of incredible story that's not truthful. That's why the evidence and the information that I have provided is in fact truthful. The defendant can claim whatever they want. The defendant can make any claims that he wants. That's what he has done. The advantage that you've offered to me, unlike the first two attempts, meaning through the Better Business Bureau and also through the Office of Consumer Affairs, is that the defendant never had to prove anything they have ever said. You are the first and only person who has been able to get the defendant to provide something other than just his word.